Welcome to another of BirdLife Australia's Powerful Owl videos. There's a whole series of these, so I'd encourage you to check other ones out if you're interested in other parts of the project or nocturnal wildlife more generally. Again, in this video we're just going to cover some of the research that's been done and some of what we already know about powerful owls. But none of it would be possible without the help of our sponsors and without the help of hundreds of volunteers that really drive the project. They really run it. Going in, day out into the forest to listen for owls. So that's why this works. So as far as we know, the main reason powerful owls are in decline is because there are a lack of these large hollow-bearing trees. It takes 100 to 500 years to create a tree that has a suitable breeding hollow for powerful owls. So, and you know, a lot of times we'll knock down these old trees in the urban environments because they might fall on something. So between just forest loss generally and knocking down hazardous trees, we've lost a lot of habitat for these birds, and that's why they've declined. That's the biggest reason for their declines. And so I have a powerful owl that visits my house every February or March and calls a few times. And, well, I figured, you know, the best thing I can do to help a powerful owl would build a nice big nest box. So I built this big, you know, dishwasher sized powerful owl nesting box and hoisted it up, you know, 15 to 20 meters in a tree in the backyard. And it's a really, really good possum hotel. You know, there's a family of possums that have now moved out of my roof and into my newly installed possum hotel. But it turns out I've since learned that artificial hollows or nest boxes have almost never worked for powerful owls. Tons of things have been tried, and it just hasn't worked. And there's been one example of a powerful owl using a nest box successfully. But again, lots of things have been tried, and generally it doesn't work. So there are some other cool things that are being done to build nest hollows in trees, because a lot of Australia's wildlife needs hollows. In the Gold Coast, they're cutting into trees a hollow. They'll cut the faceplate off, and then they'll make a hole in that faceplate. So it'll be an artificial hollow, but in a tree. And you would think that it would have a much better microclimate. So a nest box can get really hot or really cold. You'd expect these things to do much better in a lot of different ways. And it is showing to work fairly well for a lot of wildlife. But powerful owls are quite large. They need a very big hollow. And doing this, I'm not aware of one that's been done on a scale of a big enough size for powerful owl yet. But it might be something that works down the track. In New South Wales, there's all kinds of research going on looking at the difference between an artificial hollow, a natural hollow, and successful versus unsuccessful hollows. So just trying to tease apart, well, what are those microclimate differences between hollows that work and don't, and what other variables can we identify that make a good hollow? And interestingly, so a female powerful owl will spend, you know, close to 3 months in the nesting hollow. She will raise, usually on average, 2 chicks. Those 2 chicks will live in that tree for 2 months before they emerge. So they'll grow up, they'll eat, they'll poo, doing all this stuff in a small little tree hollow, relatively small. You can climb into a tree hollow 2 days after the chicks have left, and that place is clean as a whistle. No prey remains, no poo, no nothing. So there's some thinking that maybe one of the missing ingredients in our artificial hollows and our nest boxes are some kind of microfauna, whether it's fungi or bacteria, something to break down all that organic material, because clearly that must exist in a lot of these natural hollows. So this is a picture of a raptor has struck a window, and the feather dandruff has come off that bird. And an increasing threat for urban wildlife is collision. And they estimate in the United States about 350 million birds are lost every year due to collision. In Australia, the estimates are around 25 million birds, or 2.7 birds per building in Australia per year that are getting killed. So clearly those averages are driven by that big building in the forest with lots of windows. But if you have a window at home that's cleaning up a lot of birds, birds are running into that window. If you put lines down the entire length of the window that are about a centimeter apart, and they could be done in crown or with blinds, or you could use chalk, or there's products that you can buy that work quite well. But that will keep the birds from hitting that window. If you just put a decal up or something that just covers up part of the window, the birds will just dodge around the decal and they'll still strike the window oftentimes. But this is a growing problem that we're seeing in birds. Keep in mind that 25 million birds are killed by collision each year. We estimate maybe 100 million birds are killed each year by cats in Australia. So all kinds of threats that birds have to contend with that they didn't have to at one time. But for raptors, collision is of the known sources of mortality, and there might be a variety of sources of mortality we don't know about, but of the known sources, both for powerful owls and raptors, collision is the main thing that is killing raptors before they die of old age. But there's this other emerging threat that we're learning more about. So these compounds called second-generation anticoagulant rodenticides. Basically, they're rat baits, and they're rat baits with some chemical compounds that are more persistent in the environment than some of the other rat baits. Right? In Western Australia, boobook owls, a bunch of boobook owls, were tested to see if they had these compounds in their system, and 73% of the boobooks that were tested had the presence of these compounds in them, and 18%, or almost 1 in 5 of the dead birds that was looked at, had lethal levels of these compounds in them. So these are big impacts to raptor populations, and I don't know, most of you are probably aware of the DDT problem. It nearly wiped out peregrine falcons, bald eagles, other species. And it was because of bioaccumulation. It wasn't a little bit of DDT would kill you, but if you ate enough bugs, you would get an increasing load of DDT, and then your eggshells would be too thin to hatch. We're seeing actual mortality because of bioaccumulation in some of these raptors, 1 in 5. This could be a huge problem. And this compound is being shown to be very persistent right throughout the food chain. It's showing up in possums and all kinds of places. And you can buy rat baits that don't have as bad a compounds in them, or better yet, if you're at home and you're just doing small-scale trapping, just use snap traps or something else. Avoid the poisons altogether. There's some more information on the website if you want to learn more about these things. But it looks to be an emerging threat, and something we're a little concerned that maybe a raptor with a sublethal level of these compounds within them is more likely to die due to collision or other things because they don't have their wits about them. Again, that's just speculation, but we're very concerned about this growing problem because you can buy this stuff by the bucket load at your hardware store. One of the other projects that's come out of the powerful owl work is somebody's looking at the feathers, and so owl feathers under black light. If they're young feathers, they light up, and if they're old feathers, they don't. So if you look at an entire wing, if the whole wing is lit up, you know it's a first-year bird. They're all new feathers. If it's about half and half, it's a second-year bird, and if you've got a variety of feather ages as you're looking at the wing, it's a third-year bird or an adult. And understanding that in the dead birds that are picked up lets you know whether that bird who died due to electrocution or collision was a young, naive bird who maybe just hasn't learned the ropes yet, or if these are breeding adults, if they're adults of breeding age. And that has different implications for the population if we're losing a lot of adults to these threats that you find in the cities. So that work is still ongoing. I haven't heard exactly where that's landed, but it's something that we'd hope to be looking at here in Brisbane as well. Now I want to talk a little bit about ecological niche modeling or species distribution modeling. So basically, what you do is you take an area on the map and you look at, well, where are the powerful owls? And you find that the powerful owls are all in these different colored squares. And then you go to a different area where you don't have any information, but you do know that these different color squares are present, so you'd predict that powerful owls are in those locations. And the different colored squares are made up of just a multivariate stew that are assigned based on machine learning algorithms. So there's some really powerful tools that allow you to map where you think species might be in the landscape, even though you haven't visited those places. And this has been done in Victoria. It's been done using variables to predict where they are based on things like dense vegetation and forest and riparian habitat. And they've generated these maps of where suitable habitat might be in Victoria for powerful owls. These lightly shaded areas are areas predicted to be unsuitable habitat. These darker shaded areas are predicted to be suitable habitat. The black areas are places where they've actually put on radio transmitters. And so those are the places the birds are actually using. The green is protected areas. So you can see that there's a real nice agreement between the area that the birds are predicted to be using and the areas the actual birds are using. So you can develop accurate models that allow you to tell land managers and planners and others where are the important places for these birds in the landscape. And they've done that in Victoria. And one of the other interesting things that comes out of this paper is 2/3 of the time that they were tracking powerful owls were in forests that were outside of protected areas. So only 1/3 of the time were powerful owls found within protected areas. So that suggests that you could lose over half of the powerful owl habitat if you're not paying attention to how you conserve private forests. So if you're not looking at how do you encourage land for wildlife programs and wildlife conservation covenants and other mechanisms to promote conservation of forests on private lands, you're going to lose a lot of powerful owl habitat if you don't figure that one out. The other thing that comes out of the literature is places like Brisbane, Sydney, and Melbourne are viewed as possible ecological traps. So what's an ecological trap? Well, an ecological trap is a bit like Vegas. It's a place that has a lot of free food, a lot of bright lights, a lot of things to attract you to the area, but it might not be the best place to raise a family, right? So, and apologies to anyone who's watching this from Vegas, but for powerful owls, you could be attracted to an area that doesn't have any hollows. So you're there, but you're not able to breed. And there's a growing number of those kinds of places in Melbourne and a few showing up here in Brisbane, where we know there's active powerful owls, but there don't appear to be any hollows and there's no signs of breeding. But there's also this risk of dying at a younger age if you live in the cities. You're more likely to die in collision or due to electrocution. Close to 20% of the population in New South Wales in some years is wiped out by those two things. That's 1 in 5 birds, right? That's 60 birds out of a population of 300 that are killed due to things every year that they wouldn't be encountering in more natural forests. And that's going to have implications for the population. And what those implications might look like, well, Mick McCarthy from University of Melbourne did some work a number of years ago and looked at, well, what's the thing that could most likely lead a powerful owl population to go to extinction? And the most likely thing that could happen is an increase in adult mortality rates. So if we think about, let's say some random event, some stochastic event wipes out the possum population in Brisbane, maybe a virus or something. If powerful owls aren't living as long, they're going to track that drop in prey population much more acutely than they would have if they were able to just outlive that drop in prey population. So they're more likely to drop suddenly if something happens, if a lot of adults aren't living as long. One of the other things that's clear in the literature, and this is true for most forest raptors, is the species of tree rarely matters very much. The structure of the tree and of the forest does matter, but sometimes as important or even more important in the forest is those little pockets of cool air. That microclimate is one that most forest raptors seek out. So here in the southern hemisphere, you know, south-facing slopes, those areas along creeks and along drainages, along gullies, those are the areas where you would expect to find more forest raptors. And finally, one of the most clear things in the literature about powerful owls in particular is they're extraordinarily hard to find, right? The reason the Powerful Owl Project works is because we have so many ears and eyes looking for them. But on average, you're only going to find them 1 in 20 times that you go out. But you're more likely to find them if the temperature doesn't drop as low. So if you're in the middle of winter and it's a warm night, you're more likely to hear powerful owls calling on a night like that. But very, very, very hard to detect. So I hope you will join us in trying to find these birds and maybe check out some of the other videos on how to do that. Thanks.